Founders definitely should not create the playbook, but I think founders wait too long to hire a go-to-market. And I think they do that because they feel like they can't hire a good salesperson potentially without a bunch of traction. The big mistake that people make as they transition to the next phase is people don't increase price into a point where they find friction.
Ready to go? Matt, I'm excited for this, dude. I've heard so many good things, both from Ashley and from Parker. So thank you so much for joining me today, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I likewise have heard a lot of great things and watched a lot of great episodes on the podcast. So excited to join you.
Yeah, bribery goes a long way, dude. Listen, I think there's a moment when people fall in love with sales. Can you take me to when did you fall in love with sales and realize that this was the career for you?
You know, candidly, I've been, I think, in love with sales since I was, selling wrapping paper in 5th grade in elementary school. And I think for me, it's always come from probably some part of competition, wanting to sell stuff and kind of be number one on whatever leaderboard it was. And believe it or not, they get you primed for that in elementary school when you're selling wrapping paper or discount codes to your local stores or whatever. But then all the way through college, I was selling hot tubs and appliances at Sears and Cutco knives and really anything you could think of that was a commission job. I was doing it from a pretty young age.
Do you think that people are born salespeople, or do you think it's something that can be learned?
I think there's a lot of people that are born that could be salespeople, just given the kind of the attitude that you have. And I think there's certainly some people who are born who probably don't, would like run in the opposite direction from any sales job. But I think it comes from, wanting to be competitive and being okay when you lose, because in sales, like, yes, of course you win, but you lose the majority of the time, really. And so I think there's a lot of dynamics that I think that you have to kind of have the right ingredients. But I think from there, you can certainly, teach a lot of the skills that, that make a good salesperson good.
Do you think it's okay to be good with losing? Like, I fucking hate losing. I would kill my kids if they ever said that they were okay to lose. It should hurt every time in every way, and you should remember it so you never feel it again.
Yeah, well, I think, look, like loving winning and having like a deep hatred when you lose are kind of one and the same, in my opinion. And so as long as losing stings and motivates you and all of that. But I mean, if you think about in sales, I mean, even the best sales reps I know, depending on whatever segment you're in, their win rates are anywhere from 15, 20%, maybe 30, 40% at the absolute highest end. And so regardless, like every month, every quarter, you're losing the majority of the opportunities that you're in. So you got to be able to know how to, lose an opportunity and come back and bounce back and, focus on the wins and all that. So yeah, you gotta be okay with accepting a lot of rejection if you're in sales.
Why are win rates so low, Matt? I'm an amateur. This show is brilliantly successful because I know very little and I ask dumb questions. Why are win rates 15 to 20% and you're just losing to competitors?
The number one reason why you lose a deal in most cases, at least at Rippling, is indecision. People that are basically end up staying with whatever solution they have today. At least in our case, we are ripping and replacing something pretty much every time, we bring on a new customer. And so the overwhelming majority, if you look at the pie chart of closed loss reasons, it's like, almost half of them are basically like unresponsive, right? Or maybe a third of them are unresponsive. Like literally you do a few calls and it's going well and they just completely ghost you. Some other big chunk of them are people who get back to you and are like, hey, we decided to hold off for now, whatever, something in the company changed, priorities, budget, someone left. And so there's a lot, like I think win rates are different if you think about like a decisioned deal, right? Like a deal where they decided to go with you or a competitor, then I think you look at win rates that are much higher in those cases.
Can I ask, indecision, is that not just a sign that you haven't articulated the solution articulately enough?
For sure. I think someone not deciding in many cases mean that you didn't prove enough value in the solution you're selling or whatever it may be. But there are also just a lot of good reasons why someone's not ready for whatever reason, or really like dynamics change in the company. A lot of time, the person that you're evaluating with might leave the company, or so they might hire someone new who now owns that decision. And so there's plenty of good reasons. And I actually think the way that you deal with that is really, really critical. And like the best reps, they over their time and their tenure, they grow and they build a pool of those types of people. And as long as you have really good engagements with both the people that you win and also the people that you lose, they start to come back around. Like once you've been in a role for even a year, 18 months, like you just get this circle back loop of all these people that you've spoken with in the past 18 months. And a lot of times when they come in the second time, they're immediately ready. The deal cycle moves way faster. It's a lot easier. And so sometimes I think people, they get a no from somebody and they just like abandon. Sometimes in the worst cases, like they won't even respond. You know, hey, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for evaluating, all that good stuff. But I'm like over the top, like kill them with kindness when they say no. And that really just builds you this like big circle back and a loop back pipeline that will help you, you know, in years down the road.
Matt, is it easier to sell a product where you are replacing an existing line in a financial model or in an expenses page or budget, or is it easier when you are a net new line item?
I think it's way easier when you're replacing something, in my opinion. When you're trying to create a category or create budget for a thing that doesn't exist, there's just a whole bunch of different things that you have to go through. I have always, for the most part, sold a product where I think early on, I guess, in the early days back with Sam Blonde, when we were at EchoSign, you were selling an e-signature solution that was like net new. And it was hard because you go down an evaluation and someone at the very end would be like, nah, we're just going to keep doing this on paper. And you'd be like, how is that even, a consideration? It's so crazy. I think today at Rippling, we're replacing another system every time. And I find that to be a lot easier to know that like there's a deal to be had here. They're going to pick somebody and you really just need to beat the competition, and win the deal. I think that's much easier.
You said about like, often it's like indecision and just kind of ghosting. When we think about that often comes from outbound, an effective outbound that's got you to those few calls. Everyone says today, outbound's dead, 2024. No, outbound à la poubelle, to the trash in Europe. Do you agree or not?
I think people that say outbound is dead are either one of two things. Like they're either engagement baiting, looking for a reaction on LinkedIn or whatever. They know that there's a whole army of people out there where that's their profession and they're trying to kind of create, some conversation around it. Or they're generally not good or haven't grown something of large scale. I mean, to even claim that outbound is dead, it's just absurd. It's like, what else? How else would you build a business? If you think you can rely on, marketing form fills or marketing programmatic email or whatever, it just means that you've never scaled something. In fact, I'll tell you that in the early days of Rippling, one of the great mistakes is that I didn't push outbound harder. Like the marketing team at Rippling was absolutely one of a kind. They generated thousands of inbound demos every month. And we got to a kind of crisis point throughout our journey where we looked at the plan for next year and we looked at what the growth rate needed to be. And marketing was kind of like, hey, we can't grow form fills by that percentage. Like there's no way. And we had to like very, very quickly build an outbound org from scratch overnight. It was super stressful. And I wish we would have done it much earlier, but there's no way to grow and scale a big company without doing outbound. So it's harder and it's different, but to say that it's dead, I think is insane. I mean, we book 50% of our outbound demos, we book over the phone. So we schedule like 1,000 outbound demos a month in our SDR org, and literally half of them are booked over the phone. And so anyone who says it's dead, I think just doesn't know how to do it effectively.
I'm fascinated. Before we drill down into the mechanics, you said that they don't know how to do it effectively. Again, teach me. You did it too late and you regret it. What are your biggest lessons in how to build an outbound function effectively?
I'd say, one is a cheat code for us, which is that I hired Ashley Kelly, who in my opinion is the best in the business. Hands down, it's not close. She saved my ass from waiting too long to do it. And I don't think anybody could have built it in the way that we did without, her experience and our kind of previous relationship working together. But there's really two things that are important. I think the first is you have to have like a very deep partnership with marketing where you don't care about like credit. So for example, when marketing shows up and they generate 100% of the pipeline and it's all inbound demand gen, form fills, hand raisers, and they're flowing to your inbound team. When you start to spin up outbound, you're trying to create like a new, like incremental, pipeline, right? Like if you obviously hire 100 SDRs and you end up with the same demos you had when you had inbound, like that's obviously a bad equation, right? Way more cost and like no more pipeline. And so marketing, you have to like have such a partnership with them where a lot of the stuff that marketing does it drives outbound success, right? And so when you schedule outbound demos, like you've got to also give marketing credit where credit's due. And I think a lot of companies, they break that. And a lot of times they'll have marketing in you know, different orgs and sales, which is true at Rippling as well. Marketing does not roll into me, but we just have this like incredible cross-functional partnership. And so what marketing's goal in outbound is they are telling us essentially like, who should we reach out to and when? And they're doing that by capturing all this like intent over the internet, right? Who's on our website, who's on our review sites, who just recently changed the job on LinkedIn. And so they're curating like, kind of intent across all of our, you know, accounts, right? That we would want to go after. And they're teeing it up for us. Hey, this person you should reach out to right now. And then they of course help with like the messaging, right? Like here's the most effective sequences. Like they help us with the cold call scripts. And so the SDR org has an opinion on all of those things. And we're responsible for like ruthless, like execution of like a very daily driven, you know, KPI business. But marketing is absolutely critical in like making it work. And if you don't have a really strong partnership.
Okay, how do you do that effectively? Yeah, you need marketing and sales to be like super tight. So then marketing get part of your comms when you get new customers, and marketing financially incentivized. That how do you literally do that?
I think it comes from, I mean, first it comes from like the culture of the org, and generally from like the CEO, right? Like if I show up to a meeting with Parker and I'm like, hey, we're going to massively whiff revenue this month, but like it's all marketing's fault, you know, like they didn't generate the demos they said they were, like that should, like I giggle at like the idea of that, right? Like that would absolutely never fly, right? Like that conversation wouldn't be able to happen. And so you can't like blame marketing when you miss the plan, because it's like, so what? Like we have a plan. What are you going to do about it? And you can't take all the credit for yourself when you build an outbound org and all of a sudden the pipeline splits and you've got 50-50 or whatever. You have to acknowledge and give marketing credit. And while they're not incentivized from like a comp perspective, it's like deeply built into the culture that like our marketing team has a pipeline plan that they sign up for. They don't have like a, you know, how many, you know, webinars did you do and how many content downloads did you get? Like those things are important, but like their goals are how much pipeline do you generate? Like that's all we talk about in our forecast meetings. Like that's what they're geared around. And so I think culturally you have to have it be that way from the top down. So
we have like a top pipeline number, and that is revenue. Like who sets that? How is it distilled down to the org?
So, you know, the way that we think about a plan, there's two different ways that I think you think about a plan. And for us historically, we start with usually something that Parker is like, hey, like if we want to continue to be in the top, you know, 1% of SaaS companies out there, like this is the number that we need to go get next year. This is the growth rate that we need. Like this is what we need to hit to continue to be like, you know, an outlier in the market. And you look at that number and you're generally like, wow, that's definitely not an easy number to go hit. Otherwise, like, of course, why would it be an outlier? But then you go through like a ruthless, like detailed planning process. For us at Rippling, we have 50 different sub-segments, right? So you have, you know, SMB and mid-market and enterprise and channel sales and product sales and all the different products. And so if you think about, there's like 50, you know, capacity plans in a spreadsheet. And it's like, how many demos are we going to generate? How many reps are we going to hire? Like, what are their quota? And you go through that in great detail through all of the different teams. And you basically ladder up and you kind of ignore the number. Like you're not focused on the number that someone asked you to get to. You start from a place of, if I just make reasonable assumptions about growth and all these different things, like what does that get me to? And then generally there's like the plan that you believe is attainable. And then there's like the plan that you want to get to, and there's a gap there. And then you go through this exercise of like, how are we going to plug that gap? Like what are the 10 or 15 different, you know, levers that we could pull this year to be able to close that gap? And for us,
so I understand. So you set the pipeline number of, let's say, I don't know, 20 million in ARR. Okay. We want to add 20 million in ARR. I could add 21 million enterprise contracts, or I could add, you know, 100,000 contracts. Do you just leave it to your team to determine where it comes from? How do you think about that breakup, that segment breakup?
I mean, it really depends on like the stage, right? So when you're early on, you actually start from a place of like who are we getting demos from, right? Like we're getting demos today, you know, like what do they look like? And you know, and you're kind of in many ways, like that is your segmentation. You kind of build around that. I mean, we had one sales team when we started, right? And then we branched off from there. As you start to go up market a little bit, a bunch of things happen, you branch off. And so, I always tell people, like, by the time you get to be maybe, I don't know, 200 million or something, like your job as the CRO, it completely changes to essentially like head of sales operations. Like you have a great sales operations team, but at some point it transitions completely from like, can you close the deals and, are you the best salesperson or whatever, to like operational planning. And so you take the demos that exist. What did we do last year in all these different segments? And you kind of figure out like, where do I think we can do a little bit better? And you just kind of start to slot in all of the humans against those different segments. So Parker doesn't care. He's not like, hey, we need this much revenue from all these different segments. He's like, we need this revenue. Like, you go figure out how to do it. And then we build like a tops down plan from there, based off of how many demos are we going to get in what segment, and how many people do we want to staff against those, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so when we think about the different segments, we've got like SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. When we think about like demos booked, what does the different close rates look like across the different segments?
I mean, we sell to companies as small as, 3-4 employee founders running payroll for the first time, right? And so on the very low end of that market, we win 50-60% of the opportunities. And honestly, the majority of the ones we don't win, they're just like, funding fell through or whatever. Like they don't need to run payroll anymore for some reason. And on the high end of the market, we're selling to companies that are up to about 5,000 employees. And so, it really has like a wide range of kind of the different segmentations. Now for us, we have segments that are based off of employee size, like any traditional company. But then we also have a bunch of products that like our core kind of new logo reps sell. But then we have too many products. We've got like 30 different products at Rippling. And so as we started to spin off different product suites, like we launched a finance suite to compete with your Brexes and your Ramps of the world. We launched a global payroll suite to compete with your Deals and Remotes and Buy Global. And so at some point we had to carve off like a separate, what we call product account executive team. So you have like a core rep that sells the majority of the HR stuff. Then you've got like a different finance suite rep, you've got a global suite rep. And so that's how you end up with like 50 segments when you end up with a product suite that's, 30 plus products.
I get you totally. So we have like a 50-60% on SMB. What does mid-market and enterprise look like?
Yeah. So mid-market is probably around, like 20-ish%. And then I think enterprise is maybe closer to like 15%. And I think the way I think about this is it really depends on what you measure, right? And so for us, like if you schedule a demo and somebody like takes the call and basically says like, yes, I would like a follow-up email. Like, we don't go through like, do you have a budget and, what's your timeline? I mean, we do that in a sense in the evaluation, but we're not incredibly strict about like, who do we bring into the pipeline? And so when we, convert a demo, we call it stage 2 and S2. We measure win rate like from S2, all the way to a one deal, but that's going to be like a penalizing kind of win rate. If you've converted something to stage 3, that means like they've engaged in like scheduling a second call, right? Like they actually have some commitment to like do a proper evaluation. And if you measure win rates from like stage 3 to win, then like you actually have a much higher win rate. And I think companies do this in very different ways.
Dude, what's ACV size? What average contract value size is enough to justify outbound? Because if you're 3 to 4 people and you're doing like, I don't know the ACVs on the 3 to 4 people, but they're not going to be huge.
Yeah.
You can't afford an expensive model.
Yeah.
What is enough?
So it's a good point. So when we don't do outbound for those type of companies, like that team is 100% an inbound team. We do outbound in our mid-market segment, which is essentially 50 to call it 250 employees. And then we do, enterprise air quotes, from like 250 to 1,000. And then we have a team that works from 1,000 to 5,000 person companies. Now, one of the benefits of Rippling is when you buy Rippling, you're buying a seat for like every single person in the company. So like a lot of products, if you're buying, Confluence or something, right? You get a seat for everybody, but it's like $10 PEPM, right? If you're selling Salesforce, it might be $100 PEPM, but like you're only getting, 5 seats in a 50-person company, right? We are fortunate that everybody at Rippling, you're getting a seat for everybody. And our average PEPM is like $60, $70 PEPM across the customer base. So for our mid-market segment, selling to companies 50 to 250 employees, the average deal size is like $45K. And so at 45K, you can easily build outbound, right? And then going up from there, it just gets easier.
You can easily build outbound. What do the sales cycles look like?
In our mid-market segment, where we have a $45,000 average deal size, it's probably the average sales cycle is probably like 50 days. Like you'll get deals that come in, a month at the right time of year, and then you'll get deals that take 3, 4, 5 months on the longest end. But on average, it's probably 50, 60 days in our mid-market segment. There's not a lot of companies closing $45,000 deals in 60 days. Like that's a very uncommon kind of, funnel.
45K outbound is justified. At 45K, is customer success justified?
In terms of customer success, like at Rippling, we in the very early days, we had customer success, which I think of as like their, charter is make customers successful, renew them, but like it's not to like, it's generally not to like sell new products. And so, early on at Rippling, again, we had 3 products when the company first launched, and now we have over 30. And so at Rippling, early on, we had customer success. And when somebody signed up for Rippling and then they came back 6 months later to add a product, like we would bring it back to the original sales rep. And like over time, that was just like clearly a terrible model. And so we converted.
Why was that clearly a terrible model? Because that does keep the purity of the customer success and sales relationship.
Because our sales reps are very like high velocity. They're doing a lot of calls, and they're focused on, if a new logo deal is $45,000, like an add-on contract for someone that signed up 6 months ago might be $5,000 or something. And so when their calendar's stacked up with deals that are 40, 50, 60K, and then all of a sudden you throw this meeting on their calendar for a $5,000 deal, they're just not going to be able to give it the attention that it needs. And so we split the team, and we changed the function. We said, look, we need like account management. We need people who, have had sales, carried a quota, want to be held accountable to quota and all that kind of stuff. And so at Rippling, we have new logo sales reps that like, pass a deal over the fence. And then they have account managers who own the commercial relationship renewals. They still own like success. Like unsuccessful companies will not buy anything new from you, obviously. And so they do have to make them successful, but they are much closer to like a sales team than a support team for us.
I had Chad Peets on the show, like a very famous CRO who works with Sutter Hill, has been in some of the most awesome enterprise companies. And he was like, no, actually, it wasn't him. It was Degnan. It was Chris Degnan at Snowflake. And he was like, CS is bullshit. You have like professional services, you pay for it, it's a stellar service, or customer support. But customer success is BS. Do you agree?
It's a good question. I would say that for multi-product companies, yes, because the reality is you can't have both. You can't have like a customer success manager and an account manager. Now, at Rippling, we do have account managers that own the commercial relationship and kind of, expanding their usage within our product suite. But then we do have what we call technical account managers whose like sole focus is like adoption of the product, success, retention, whatever. And then we have like a phenomenal support team who can respond urgently, jump on chat, jump on calls, whatever, right? But I do believe that you have to pick one or the other. And at Rippling, like, for me, account management and like a sales DNA at the core is just, you can get those people to have like empathy for the customer and like understand and care about making them successful. But I don't think you can take a CSM and make them, like a quota carrying rep.
For the account managers, how are they incentivized? And is that aligned to the upsell that you want them to drive?
Yeah. You also have to do both. So when we first launched account managers, they only had a new revenue quota. So the 100% of their focus and comp plan was tied to selling new products. But then, and so they cared about retention, but like they didn't own a retention number. And, when you're high velocity, a little bit more down market, there was just a belief that like, they would care and do the right things, but like you didn't need to incentivize them. And then we did that for like, 9, 12 months. And we quickly realized, okay, this doesn't make sense. And this year, actually, we changed the comp plan. So I think like 70% of it is tied to selling new business, and 30% roughly is tied to retention, specifically like dollar retention. And it completely changed everything in our, have just like completely outlier, like off the charts, low churn metrics. And so they got to own new revenue and churn. Absolutely has to happen. Can't do it any other way.
When we think about getting deals over the line, a lot of people discount today. It's an incredibly competitive landscape. Respectfully, you have many competitors across many different segments. How do you think about discounting?
Um, so first of all, discounting is a completely like made up thing. Like at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is like net price, right? And so discounting is simply a factor of like, where do you set your list price? Like list price doesn't matter, right? Like net price. So whether if you discount 50% off or you discount 25% off, like it's all relative to whatever your list price is, which for most people is like a fake price. Like nobody cares about list price. They care about net price. And so I'm a big believer.
So what for those that don't know, which is including me on this one, what do you mean by list price and net price?
So let's say that your list price, meaning when you show up and you send, I mean, look, starting all the way with like some companies have a price on their website, right? If you're very SMB and down market and you have a bunch of like self-serve signups and trials and all that, you basically need to have like a price on your website where someone can see it and sign up, whatever. That's not our business. Like for us, we are generally, getting somebody on a call, understanding like, what their pain points are, what products are they interested in, because we have 30. And so for us, we have a list price, meaning there's a book price for every SKU that we have. So let's say it's $10 PEPM for a random SKU, but like the actual price point that we're trying to target might be, $8 or $7 or $6. Like it depends on the size of the company. If you come in and you're 50 employees and you want to sign up in 1 week, like I've got a little bit more room to make that happen. If you're 50 employees and you want to evaluate for 3 months, then then it might be a different price point. It might depend on the different, amount of products that you buy.
Do you worry about different customers talking about different prices? Hey, I got Rippling for 20 PEPM. Oh, you got it for 30? Wow, yeah. They overcharged you.
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. So one is we have like an extremely consistent and firm like discount policy. So it's not like a rep can just, make up whatever they want to do. And so we'll tell a customer when they come in, like, hey, here's what pricing looks like on a 1-year deal versus a 3-year deal, or like depending on your timeline or depending on the amount of products that you buy, right? And so for us, you could come in and buy 3 products in a week, or you could come in and buy 10 products and take 6 months. And so there's a bunch of different, there's probably 5 different levels of how big are you? What are you buying? What's the timeline look like? All these different things. But I'm confident that, and this happens, like people definitely talk in the market, and, we've got 20,000 plus customers. And so for sure, people are talking and comparing invoices and whatever. But if somebody were to come back to us, which has happened before, and been like, hey, this is bullshit. I looked at someone's quoted Rippling and I got a different price than you. And when I walk them through like, hey, look, here's like, you might think these things are the same, but they're a little bit different. As long as you can like walk through the policy and stand behind it, which in this case, it ended up working fine, then I think you're good. But you can't have like wild west where people just make up whatever price they want, or else that it can get out of control pretty quickly.
I think early on, people are often told that logos are so important. Get there, you go to the startup pages and it's like retooler customers, striper customers, like you name your companies that look sexy at customers.
Yeah.
And that's so important. To what extent do you think logos are super important in driving sales versus just get early wins on the board?
So I think it's interesting. I think there's like an evolution in a few different phases. I think the first one is when you're a, 0 to 1 company, whatever, you're $1 million, $2 million, like early stage, like nothing matters. The only thing that matters is winning customers. It doesn't matter what they pay. It doesn't matter what their logo is. Like you need customers to validate that like you can charge something for your product and that they'll buy it. If you look at what we charged at Rippling in the early days versus now, like it's not even on the same chart. And so you need customers. And I think founders make a mistake. They're trying to like maximize the revenue of one specific deal, which is crazy. It's like never ever walk away from any deal, any price that's not free. Like you sign them up, right? I think the big mistake that people make as they transition to the next phase, where they're at maybe 5, 10, they're going to 20 million, is people don't increase price into a point where they find friction, right? And so you need like friction around price is good. And so to your question earlier, like I get this all the time. I'll talk to, an early stage founder who's often a technical founder who's a referral from one of our, VCs or something. And they're like, hey, we have win rates that are like 60, 70%. We have an incredible go-to-market fit. Like it's so great. My first thing I always tell them is I'm like, that's not good. You don't want win rates that are 60, 70%. You're either not in enough deals, right? Like you're just way too narrow, or your price is way too low. Like if you win 70% of deals, then like that's not good. It's a bad, or at least you could go much bigger, right? And so I think people don't raise price up until they get to a point where you're about to lose deals because like people think you're overpriced and there's like friction.
How do you know when that point is, Matt? Is it when people go, "Oh, I'm not doing it," and then you walk them back? When is that moment of realization that you've gone as high as you can go?
Yeah. First of all, like I think the main thing here is like you should continue to inch it up over time until that friction of like, hey, this is more expensive than I thought it would be. This is like outside of our budget. This is, 100% more than our competitor, 2x the price of a competitor or whatever. Until you get people that are like, walking away, then you haven't found the right amount of friction. Right when you get to that point, and again, you got to go up gradually because you never, ever, ever, ever want to like go back, right? You don't want to like raise them and then be like, oh, never mind, we're going to like lower our prices. Like that's bad. And we don't do this, by the way, on existing customers. Like as we inch price up over time, like our existing customers that bought early on, like we lock them in pretty much forever. But you have to find that friction. And I think you'll squeak out a lot more revenue by finding, if you raise your prices 20% and like, you keep winning, maybe win rates go down a tiny bit, like that's okay over time.
How do you think about like multi-year contracts? Often today, it's like, hey, as much as possible, a lot of people into multi-year contracts. It does mean that you're stuck on price. It means there's more rigidity in their minds. Maybe they won't upsell as much because they've got a contract with you. It's kind of a pain, like multi-year, to kind of change that multi-year. How do you think about that and advise founders?
Multi-years is really important. And we have multi-year deals and we incentivize our sales team to sell multi-year deals. So if you sell a 1-year deal versus a 3-year deal, like we'll give you like a kicker in the comp plan to sell a multi-year deal.
Can I ask, Matt, what difference is the kicker? I just have so many people who will ask me like, what is the difference?
Yeah, it's got to be relative to there's so much goes into like, the way I think about it is like, what is your, commission rate on a new logo? And like that could range anywhere from 10% to 30%, depending on like, are you outbound, are you inbound? Like, what deal size, whatever. And so you want to make sure that the kicker you're paying on a deal isn't much more than like, let's call it like 10, 15% of the deal, right? So maybe if your commission rate is 20%, then maybe you're giving them an extra like 2 to 3% kicker for a multi-year deal, but you can't make it that your commission rate is 20% and then you sell a multi-year deal and you get paid 40%, right? Like that math doesn't work. And so it's generally like, I'd say maybe 10, 15, 20% of the original contract, like the year one contract, like, or thinking of the commission rate, like that's the right way to think about it.
So discounting and price is a way to instill urgency in deals. Hey, let me get Matt, you know what? It's the end of the quarter. I need to hit my number. I'll give you a 10% discount if you sign with us today. Any other big lessons on how to instill a sense of urgency in deals and sales cycles?
The first big mistake that people make around, discounting is they offer time-based discounts before they even understand if somebody can possibly move that fast, which is like a terrible experience, both for like you, because you have no leverage once you've like thrown it out there. And then for the customer, it just like, it feels awkward. It doesn't make sense. So the first thing you have to do is understand from somebody up front, like in the first call, what is your ideal timeline? And the way we talk about that is like, look, you're obviously evaluating Rippling. You've described these pain points up front. Like, just assuming that you wave a magic wand and Rippling literally solves every single one of those pain points that you have, what is your like ideal timeline of when you'd like to be up and running in a new system? Just like if you could have everything, every box checked, your perfect scenario, what does that look like? And then when they tell you that, and like, look, a lot of buyers are honest about that. Some buyers don't. Some buyers know that when they're up front, they're like, I don't want to tell this salesperson that I want to move quickly, right? Like then I lose some leverage in the negotiation. And so they'll be like, this is, like next year, Q1 or whatever. But you got to find out from people, what are they looking to do, and like build some trust up front. And then before you get to pricing, you have to like, kind of make a little bit of pokes out there. Like, hey, if we can get, some competitive pricing that's kind of based on a timeline, this timeline we talked about, does that seem like something that you'd be interested in? And like get some buy-in from them, because people do not sign contracts on the last day of the month because they're worried that their discount's going to go away. Like that's absolute bullshit. Like if you ever bought software and it's the 31st of the month and someone's like, you have this quarter end discount, like, it's extremely unlikely that if you come back on the 3rd or the 4th, they're going to be like, no, I won't give you that price. Like certainly there might be a different price. You might have to go through a whole cycle, whatever. But the reason that the majority of people like sign that contract on the 31st, the end of the quarter, whatever, is because you built a relationship throughout the entire valuation of some like trust. Like they feel, you know what I mean? Like they feel like they've agreed to do some things and they want to like meet their part. But without that, then time-based discounts don't work for anybody. And they're actually they're like, they really are counterproductive.
How do you do deal reviews, and how's that changed over time?
I'll pick like our, let's call it our middle, mid-market team who's kind of like in the middle. But I think the main thing that you're looking for in a deal review is like reps get, like salespeople by almost like definition are like optimistic, right? And so oftentimes they get happy ears and they hear things that they want to be true, that might be true, but they don't sometimes ask like the second, third layer question to figure out if it is true. And so for me, deal reviews are all about like that. They're all about asking your rep, who are we talking to? Who does that person report to? Were they there when they bought this system? Like, a bunch of questions around who are they talking to? How do these decisions get made? What do they think the timeline is? Like you're trying to basically poke a hole in this. If you're just sitting there and your rep is like, hey, here's the next step and here's who I'm talking to. And, it's all good. And you're like, okay, great. Sounds good. Like, let's go to the next one, which is what a lot of pipeline reviews look like. That's like zero helpful. Like you got to create a relationship with your rep where you can poke holes at them and they're trying to like, prove to you why this is a solid deal. And there's no friction there. They're like, hey, this is what my manager shows up to do.
How often do we do deal reviews first?
We have pipeline reviews every week at Rippling.
Okay, so we do pipeline reviews every week. Who's invited? Everyone from sales?
Generally we're doing pipeline reviews with like, managers and rep in like a one-on-one setting. Usually there are times where we do a pipeline review that might be with like a manager and their team, but you can't sit around a 40-person segment and do deal reviews, right? Like it won't be time effective.
So we do it manager and rep, so to speak. Okay, perfect. When we think about like an acceptable versus a non-acceptable reason for a deal to slip, what is an acceptable versus a non-acceptable if you're sitting down with me, a rep?
The first thing I think about is like what is the historical tendency of like this rep? Because deals do push in sales all the time. As Parker would say, did it push or did it poof? When I show up at the end of the month and I'm like, hey, had a rough month, but we had some really good deals push. He's like, I don't believe, like every time you say that they poof and they don't push, they never come back and blah, 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 which is generally not true, but he's a deep skepticism of that. But you got to look at a rep. Like, does this rep normally close deals in this timeline and this deal did push? Then that's very different than someone who's a perennial, like my deals always push. And I think the thing you gotta help reps understand is like deals that put, like a lot of times reps will think that a deal that pushed because of this person left the company or a new person joined or a budget, dried up or whatever. They convince themselves that like, hey, this is delayed. This is just delayed. Like this new person joined and like they want to make sure that they get a demo. And it's like, there's no such thing as like delaying a deal for like those types of reasons. Like you're starting over from scratch. You might not know it, but you're starting over from scratch. And so time kills all deals. And so you really want to try to like get them in, not to like hit your quota so that you don't go on a PIP or whatever. Like you want to get them in because over time, like if we push as a company 25 deals in a month, like for sure, we're not closing those 25 deals in the next month, right? Like some percentage of them just do poof and evaporate. There are good reasons, but like, I'll tell you the worst reason is like, the legal team didn't get the review done. Nothing is more frustrating than somebody being like their legal team, right? They didn't get the red lines done on time.
Why is that so frustrating? Because that seems like it's out of the hands of the rep. They don't control the legal team. That seems like a very bizarre negative externality.
Well, I think it depends on, so when first of all, for me, when a deal pushes, what that fundamentally means is that like you forecasted it to come in. Right? Like you said it was going to come in and it didn't come in. If telling us and rolling a deal up that, hey, this deal is definitely coming in, like they just need to get red lines signed. And a lot of times when you pro back in there, it's like, look, when did you send them the red lines? They're like, yeah, they told me yes, 2 days ago and I got them the red lines the next day. And it's like, well, hold on, like there's your problem, right? Like at the end of an evaluation, you should be asking somebody like, hey, what does the contract processing look like within your company? Like, who's involved in that process? Who signs off on contracts? Like, does your legal team do a review for contracts of this size, whatever? And you want to like parallel track those things so that someone's reviewing the terms of service. Like, a lot of times you'll get the like vendor of choice designation before someone gives you the like, yes, send me the contract, I'm ready to sign. So you have to parallel track those like legal things, budget review. You can't just like get a yes and then start all those processes over. And that's the number one reason why people push a committed deal, because of legal review, is like they just didn't run this in like, they didn't run these parallel tracks.
I love that push or puff. I've never heard that before. I've done many fantastic shows. I've never heard that analogy before. There's a lot of deals today, Matt, sadly, which are puff, which are gone silent, gone dead, budgets have gone. What's been your biggest lesson as a sales leader on how to maintain morale in volatile times?
There's kind of like two-part question. I think the first thing is I really believe very deeply in like a core thing that I had to learn over time. And one of the things, going back to the beginning of our conversation, when you're like a deeply competitive person and you do like expect to win and you like really, really hate losing, I can definitely tell you of examples in the past where I like reacted poorly to someone that said no, right? Or someone where it was just like, it made no sense to me. And like my initial reaction was just like the wrong reaction, right? And it's very easy for even the best salespeople, because they're generally like the most competitive, can get like pissed off and react poorly in a deal. And I had to learn over time that like, you have to literally like kill them with kindness. Like you have to make them, when someone tells you no, it's like, hey, like, thank you so much for your time, evaluating Rippling. I know how busy you are. I'm sure doing all these evaluations was like a total time suck for you. Thank you so much for, taking the time. I would greatly appreciate like any feedback you could give me. I'm always looking to learn. By the way, like if anything ever changes, like I hope that you're successful with XYZ vendor, but if anything ever changes, like please just know that like I'm here for you, blah, 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 blah. If you leave every single interaction with that type of like mindset, I promise you'll get stuff that bounces back that you like never like expected to bounce back. They'll come back in 2 months. And they'll be like, hey, this competitor like lied to us. The implementation's terrible. There's a bunch of shit that they don't do that they said they did, but you have to leave it like that. And so I think on one hand, you got to like make sure that you're not sour when you miss, and you like morale. It's like if you're moping your head around and you're all frustrated and upset, like that doesn't do you any good. It's a waste of time. And I think as a sales leader, you've got to like own the miss. Like you can't if you point fingers at people and that's the MO that you have as a leader, like it sounds very cliche, but it's like, you got to walk up there and be like, we love the sales org lost. I didn't set the team up successfully. Like I screwed this up. Like you got to own it with the CEO. You got to own it with the people down below you. And I think weak or like insecure, sales leaders will try to deflect blame to some other leader or the team, or you train. It's like Parker told me once a long time ago, I think something that really stuck with me. He's like, you don't get any credit for knowing how to do something yourself. Like zero credit that you know how to do X, Y, and Z. Like your job as a sales leader is to get everybody else to do that. And so like, you can't stand there and have like, my team didn't execute and be feeling like, dude, I told them exactly what to do. And like, they didn't execute, you know what I mean? Like, it's not me. I got to get a new team or something. It's like, your job is to make them execute. It's not to know what to do. You're the head of sales. Obviously you should know what to do. That's table stakes.
Matt, when you evaluate your go-to-market team today, okay, we're sitting here, we've got a fire beside us, a whiskey and a cigar. We're just like shooting the shit now. Where are you like, oh, that bit's the weakest part of the go-to-market? And what are some lessons for you from that?
If I think about the way that the company kind of evolved, I would say that up until literally 18 months ago, I'd say up until 2 years ago, like the sales org, myself and like everyone that reported to me, literally never once thought about generating an outbound demo, or like even like it was 100% like demos pop up on your calendar. Like marketing does a bunch of stuff, inbound SDRs schedule them, and like you just sit on, go show up and you do 4 or 5 calls a day, and like that's all you do. And I think over time we got to this, I mentioned this pinnacle point like 2 years ago where Ashley Kelly, we were like, oh my God, we have to do outbound. We hired her. We like, grew it from 0 to 100, whatever. And like, we started to weave into the culture, like, hey, like as a sales rep, like you should care about where your pipeline comes from, but they still don't own it. Like outbound SDRs own the quota, like they schedule the demos. If you're a rep at Rippling, you have 0 like actual prospecting targets. And so over time, it was like the whole sales org.
Which is unique because like actually every guest that I have on the show says that a rep should be also responsible for leads and that you can't just be like outbounds feed me.
Yeah.
It's almost presumptuous.
Like I understand that belief. And I think that Rippling definitely will, of course, get to some scale and like saturation of the market where that's kind of true. But I believe that it is like critical to like avoid that as long as you possibly can. And the reason why is like I have seen outbound. We've done outbound in 15, 20 different like segments. And every single time there's a funnel of like, number of accounts you work, dials, emails, your call to connect rate, your connect to demo rate. Like there's this funnel that just, if you put all the things in the top, it just spits out demos. And every single time we look at a new SDR team, somewhere in that funnel is broken. They're not doing enough of this, enough of that. They're like called to connect. Like there's always some part of it. And then you hammer it and you go fix it and you train on it. And then it turns green and like all of a sudden they spit out demos. And in my opinion, like you can get an SDR org to do that way, way, way more effectively than you'll ever be able to get sales reps to do it. So sales reps, what they want is they're like, give me a book of accounts that I can like control my own destiny, right? Where I'm not like told I can't prospect, but like, let me do something. But then when you give them accounts, generally speaking, like without a whole bunch of structure and focus, like they're not ever going to show up and do the way that you manage a rep doing outbound is not the same as the way you manage an SDR doing outbound.
You said that not doing outbound was a big mistake. What did you do that you wish you hadn't done?
The slides, and then we roll out the pitch deck and I do the trainings and I do the script. And like when you're an early stage company, that makes a lot of sense. And then all of a sudden you get 5 segments, 10 segments, 20 segments, and like you're no longer the expert about all of them. And so I definitely held on to that like way too long, kind of being the number one person in the org who like knew the script and the pitch and the competitors. And probably 2 years ago, I hired like my first kind of like layer of just like really kind of successful VPs underneath me. And then over time, now it's like I literally don't even think about those things. Like it's completely owned by the VP of SMB or the VP of mid-market or whatever. And I should have done that like a lot sooner, because what happened was we would be doing deals, or we'd be in like, we'd have a deck that sucked, and I'd go look at it and I'd be like, this deck is terrible. Like this feels so stale. Like how does the SMB org stand up and like give this deck every day? Like it's so bad. This is 18 months old. And there was just a general thinking of like, well, you made the deck, right? Like you authored this thing. And I'm like, no. Like you guys are better than me at all of this stuff. Like you're doing it all day long. Like everybody should feel empowered to be like, this thing that you're telling us to do is dumb. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. And I don't think I like inflicted that like early enough in enough places. And today, like, my team is a lot more useful than I am in terms of actually winning business and bringing customers on board.
Matt, can I ask, when you look at revenue, what's the revenue makeup between SMB, mid-market, and enterprise?
It's a tough question to ask because we have like direct segments, channel segments, product segments. Like there's literally 50 segments. And so, but like what I would tell you is my, like at the end of next year, my SMB, mid-market, and enterprise teams will all be like, roughly the same size, probably like SMBs, maybe 60 reps, mid-markets, maybe 90 reps, and enterprise is maybe like, 40-ish reps or something. But that's 150 reps, and there's probably 300 reps across the board that are at different types of places. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Okay, but like, is it like 30%? Like, how do you think about that?
The fastest growing segment for sure is like our upmarket segment. Like we're moving that market like very quickly, and used to not compete with the Workdays of the world, and now we're in a lot of deals with them. And so that piece of the business is, and if you're going to grow 60, 70, 80, 90% year over year at hundreds of millions of dollars, like you have to be able to have some things that are growing 200-300%. Like that's the only way you'll maintain the growth rate. And so I'd say our upmarket teams are growing a lot faster.
What's not growing fast enough today?
I'm thinking about Parker would probably say everything. But I think probably like international, to be honest. Like in international, we have teams now, go-to-market teams in Dublin selling into Europe. We've got a team in Sydney selling into kind of Australian market. So there's a bunch of international teams in place where we feel like we have incredible like product market fit. But we're trying to crack the code of like, you can't just like land in these places and run all the same playbooks and do all the same stuff. And so I think our growth internationally is like there could be explosive growth and there will be soon, but we're like still kind of tweaking the ingredients a little bit.
Why do you think that hasn't gone to plan?
Candidly, like when you enter a new market, like you have to be like, everything is way more expensive. Like is a big, like when you're an early stage company, like efficiency like doesn't really matter. Like you don't even have a business, right? Like it's not about how efficient are you. It's like you're just trying to win any way possible and you're losing money and all that good stuff. As you get to be larger, like, and you're, our size, like all of a sudden, like efficiency is like the number one constraint. Like there are things that we could go do to win more business in places that we don't do because we couldn't do it efficiently and we're not trying to light money on fire. And so in the US market, there's all these other things. There's organic, there's brand, there's all this like free, like accrued benefit over time. And so you can afford to go pay money and do different things to acquire leads in more expensive ways. When you go internationally, like all you can do on day one, right? You can go put money in the LinkedIn machine or the Facebook machine or the review sites or whatever, and you can get demos, but like you don't have all of the like easier, more free stuff to like blend the portfolio into something that works. And so your growth is just like, it's a little bit stunted if you want to grow efficiently. Like we don't get to grow in these markets the same way that early stage companies do, who don't really care that much about being efficient. Like we do care about being efficient. And so there are kind of these like, guardrails that we have to operate within. And so that has made growth a little bit slower than it would have been.
Why be there at all? Let's have this thought exercise. You have a lot of markets still to get in the US. You've got a lot of products that you can, bluntly expand penetration across. Why bother with Australia? There's no one there anyway.
Because I think all of the non-US markets, like starting with Canada and for sure in Europe and, in APAC, like their HR software landscape is at least a decade behind where the US is. Like in the US, you have, 10 plus like major public company payroll providers, right? Like there's just an enormous, you've got all these IT companies, like all the Ramps and Brexes of the world. Like it's a deeply competitive market. And when you go internationally, pretty much in every country, whether it's, the UK or France or Germany or Australia, whatever, there's literally like 2 people at max that are in that space. And one of them is like a completely old, archaic, like awful system. And one of them is like a brand new startup that's like modern and easy to use, but has like enormous, issues kind of like supporting all the different various use cases, large companies, whatever. So there's just, those markets are like extremely ripe for disruption. And I think we have a really strong product market fit. And then there's a bunch of other things where like, we do really well with multinational companies in all of those markets.
But then it's like, why is it not working then? Because it's like, Matt, I say this like we're ideating here, but like the efficiency side, I kind of get, but I kind of don't, dude. I'm an investor in early stage companies and we compete with Rippling and it's like, fuck. These Americans have so much more cash than we do.
Yeah.
Like you have so much more money than us.
Yeah.
Efficiency.
Well, so a couple of things. One is it is working in the sense that like the win rates are really good, the ACVs are really good, all that kind of stuff. What is scaling slower than you would like is pipeline generation and top of funnel. And that's because no matter how much money we have, we could be sitting on $1 billion of cash. Like we are not going to go invest in top of funnel that is inefficient just to grow faster. Like that's just like our guardrails are like, there's a certain CAC payback.
Why not? Because that top of funnel that's inefficient can increase in efficiency over time as you build word of mouth, local brand, network effect within nations. Is there not a time where actually you spend always inefficiently at the beginning, as you did in the US, to get more efficient over time?
Yeah, I think that that's certainly a way to do it. I would say that we are pretty disciplined in the kind of finance function at Rippling to like not, get the cheap thrill and go sink a bunch of money into these markets, because like the reality, it's not just that it's inefficient. It's that like, we don't know exactly what works, right? Like it's not the same playbook. The growth playbook is not the same. And so, yeah, you could think that you could convince yourself that you could spend inefficiently and of course it'll work because it works in the US, but like you also might just light a ton of money on fire and like your whole strategy just might not work at all for a long time, whatever. And so I think really the answer for us as like Outbound has been the thing that we've been able to scale the most, because all of the growth demand gen stuff is expensive when you can't offset it with referrals and word of mouth, whatever. And so the Outbound thing is working really well for us, but like you got to hire 20, 30, 40, 50 outbound SDRs. You got to ramp them. You got to train them. Like it just takes longer to ramp the engine when you can't just go spend $1 million, on kind of, paid advertising and get a bunch of demos that show up.
I totally get you. You mentioned the word playbook there. I'm constantly oscillating on this one. Should the founders be the one to create the playbook in the early days? Or is it okay? This is where Chad Peets did say this. He was like, founders, they're not the ones to create the playbook. And, you were with Parker from like basements.
Yeah.
We talk about expanding in Australia now with, the huge scale of rippling. But you were there from the beginning. Should founders be the one to create the playbook? Or should it be a revenue leader like you?
Founders definitely should not create the playbook. And I would say that Parker is like exceptional, like go-to-market CEO. In fact, I think one of his strengths is like that he really like is the, main product kind of roadmap guy. Like his vision, his product vision is really strong. But on the go-to-market side, like that guy can sniff out, bullshit from anywhere. Like he knows just like all the places to poke, all the weak spots, all the bruises. And so Parker is like involved in go-to-market from a like, is this really working? Or are you like, making it appear as though it is when it's not? Having said that, like he would never want to like, you need to do it this way, pitch people this way. And I think the reality is Parker is the best at articulating like why somebody should care about our product, like why they should want our product. Why did we build it this way? What are all the benefits of building it this way? There's no one that does that better than Parker, but he doesn't think like our buyer, you know what I mean? Like he doesn't know how to transform his like brilliant thought into like a consistent, repeatable sales playbook. He doesn't know how to do that. Like that's not his thing. And so he's involved in like the direction, you know what I mean? Like he gives a lot of feedback. He's kind of like, this is what I think. But if I push back on him, there's friction and it's good. Like friction is good and that kind of stuff. But eventually he'll get to a point where he's like, okay, that makes sense. He'll start from a place of extreme, pessimistic view. Like, I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong. Here's why. And then if you like defend the position and you convince him of why you think your way is the right way, eventually he'll just be like, okay, that makes sense. You like convinced me that that's better and you should do it that way.
Okay, so founders should not be the ones to create the playbooks. So as a founder of an early stage company, you should hire a salesperson from day one?
I mean, I think so, like when you're a founder from day one, first of all, I think you should hire salespeople way sooner than conventional wisdom. And there's a lot of salespeople that will tell you that that's not true. Like, hey, you're a founder, you got to make sure that you can sign customers up and you have product market fit. Like, don't hire this poor VP of sales to come in here who will never be successful because like your product, blah, 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 right? Like, I don't believe in any of that. Like, I believe that, I started at Parker's house when there were 4 engineers literally in the basement of his house. Like, there were no customers, there was no CRM, there was no anything. Like, granted, like me and Parker had a relationship. And so like, would I have done that with a stranger? Like, probably not. But I knew that Parker was going to like build the right thing. And I knew that he needed me to like help him figure out like, one, like do the sales so that I could take that off his plate. But there was a trust there of like, as we're building stuff and you have constrained resources in engineering, like what is the most important thing to build first? Like, how do you sequence the things we need to build? And a good go-to-market leader that you trust will help you figure that out. You know what I mean? Like, they're part of that journey. And so I think you should hire a sales leader like very early on. You probably should have some customers that have paid you some money, but I think founders wait too long to hire a go-to-market. And I think they do that because they feel like they can't hire a good salesperson potentially without a bunch of traction. And like, that may be true.
So we hire them a little bit earlier. Let's go with that, Matt. Okay. Should we hire juniors or like a senior sales leader who builds the team around them?
You want to hire for slope, right? Like, you want to hire for how steep you think somebody is like going to be able to kind of grow and scale. But like, oftentimes, like the number one thing that I look for, I think if you're looking for an early stage, sales leader, there's a bunch of things that we could get into. But I think one of the things that stands out is you want somebody who has been like rapidly promoted at the same company 2 or more times. Like, that ingredient. And what I mean by that is like, if you're an account executive for like a year and then you're a sales manager for like 9 months, and then you're like a director of sales for like a year, right? Like when you look at high growth companies that are just like growing super fast, right? Whatever, all of the historical SaaS companies you might want to go look at, to be like, where should I hire someone who worked at a high growth company? And you find somebody who was promoted multiple times. There are lots of people that get promoted once and it's a mistake, right? Like they're not good at being a manager. They don't want to be a manager or whatever. But when you find someone that's been promoted 2 times at the same company, it's like an immediate signal that that person is good, right? Like you don't get promoted twice at high growth companies if you're not good. And when they've done it in rapid succession, right? If it's like 3 years in this role, 3 years in that role, 3 years in this role, it's like, okay, that's good too. But there's nothing better than like 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. It's like, that means you promoted them. They took on a bunch of new stuff. It was growing. Everything was broken. They didn't know how to do it. And boom, they solved it. And like now they're on to the next role. And so I think you find people like that they may top out at like their experience has only been a director of sales of a 20-person team or something. And it's like, you don't need more than that when you're building a company from scratch.
Do you agree with Jason, who says, Lemkin that is, who says you'll never be able to get the all-star VP of sales to join your little company because it's so fucking hard? They've been through it once. They're not going to go through it again. They'll join you at 60 million ARR, maybe 100 million ARR, but they're not going to join your $1 or $2 or $5 million ARR company.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, in fact, I'll give you the perfect example. Like when Parker started Rippling, like who's the first person he wanted to hire? Like it was Sam Blond, right? He's like, I want Sam, come work here with me. And Sam was like, no, man, like I can't do it again. And I started, Sam hired me at Zenefits and I started there as the, 25th and Plaza account executive. And so I had kind of grown up in the, like underneath kind of like Sam at the org. And so when Parker was like, okay, like Sam's not the guy who's going to come start in the basement again for a second time 4 years later, he immediately went to like the tree. All right. Like, what's Plank doing? What's Jameson doing? Who, built Gong for many years and now works at Rippling. So he picked like both of us.
Matt, what's exceptional about you, and you know this as well, so this is probably me telling you something, you don't normally last. You normally fall out of this tree at 10 million in ARR in Rippling's journey. I don't know what your ARR is, and I'm not asking because it's private, but you guys have done unbelievably well. Normally your profile has fallen out 5 years ago. What have you done to scale with the company in a way that no one does?
I mean, look, like the first thing is, generally speaking, if you are successful on the whole journey, then there's only like one reason that you don't make it. Like if you're successful, it works, and Rippling has been fortunate to be successful. And like, yes, in some part, do I feel like I run sales and I own some of that? Yeah. But like we've been successful for a million other reasons that are not me, right? The product that we built, the marketing team we have, all these other things, right? But I think when you are winning, like the reason that you top out in some companies, right? Like they're winning, they're doing pretty well by all metrics, but then they're like, but we got to go hire like a CRO because this person is like, we're doing great, but they're not going to make it. 100% of the time it's because you can't hire like people that are better than you or overqualified. Like you can't hire people. And the biggest thing is you don't acknowledge the organic growth that you built. So for example, like when you grow early on, you're going to promote a bunch of people, managers become directors, like all this stuff, right? And when you look across your, 10, 15 leaders that you've built that are all homegrown and organic, right? You're at 10, 20 million, whatever. You haven't hired anybody from outside the company really. You just like, them so well. And you're like, you convince yourself that like, there are not gaps and they're all going to scale. And it's just like, they're not all going to scale. And so you got to be able to go to that person that you brought over from your previous company that's done really well. And know when they're like hitting a breaking point where they can't scale. And you've got to be able to like layer them in a way where hopefully they stay at the company.
Final one for you before we do a quick fire. What is the biggest signs that someone is not scaling? How does that most often show itself?
I think when someone is not scaling, I think there are two things. I think one is they end up becoming like they're leading from the back and not the front. And what I mean by that is they believe that their job now is to like tell people like what to do because they've done it, but like they don't believe their job anymore is to like do it for them, show them how to do it, be involved and like, leading the way and be like, everybody follow me. And they just kind of hit a point where they kind of think that being a director or a VP or whatever means that like all of a sudden you don't have to do that stuff anymore. And usually when that happens, they start to lose the locker room. And like, even if it's a winning team, like their team starts to not really like them, it starts to fall apart and kind of flounder from there. And you can't come back from someone who like loses, like an organic promotion who was amazing all the way through, but then they like lose the locker room because they think that that's not my job anymore. I think that's it.
Dude, I could talk to you all day. I've so enjoyed this. So I'm going to do a quick fire with you. So I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Which competitor do you most respect and why?
Oh gosh, which competitor do I most respect and why? I don't know. That's such I'm like, it's not a quick fire question. I'm so like, I don't know, probably, in the HCM space, like, I think maybe I would say probably like, in the HCM space, maybe like Paylocity is, of the legacy competitors, like they generally seem to be, like people we see in most of the deals, they do a good job, I think, of selling around their product gaps. Potentially, there's other players in our product suites. That one comes.
Is there a player where you're like, they're in here, we got this covered, we're gonna sweep the floor with them?
I guess maybe when I think about like competitor I respect the most, I think of it mostly from like a go-to-market team perspective. And so I think like when we lose to like a legacy payroll provider, I'm kind of like, damn, like we got outsold. Right? Like I know our product is better than Paylocity or ADP or whatever. And so when when we're in a competitive deal and it's neck and neck, and I'm just like, man, like they must be doing something good on the go-to-market front to make up for like all of the like horrible blemishes that exist under the surface of that product when you actually use it.
It's true, respectfully, that's all on you.
I agree,
when
totally.
you get beaten by like an ADP, it's like,
it's like you should really look in the mirror and like, you should really take that one on the chin for sure.
Tell me, what sales tactic has not changed over the last 5 years?
I mean, honestly, like it sounds cliche, but it's like I think more so now than ever, like working your ass off and hustling is like has always been able to get you ahead. But there was a culture pre-COVID where that was like table stakes and what everybody did. And you were in the office all the time and you showed up at 8 and you left at 6. And it was just like, everybody did that. It was obvious. And I think over time now, like the true, like, I just like, and it's not like I work on the weekends and I work all night. It's like when I'm like in the walls of like the arena, I'm like million miles an hour grinding, just like working my ass off as fast as possible to just like do more output. I think that is like less common than it used to be, or is more of a, is more of like an advantage than maybe it once was.
When are you going to go back to all in person?
Candidly, like I really miss the days of being like the vibe that's in a company when like you're all in there on the same days and whatever. I think having said that, I mean, we are like, if you're in an office for us anywhere in the country, like you have to be in the office 3 days a week. But we do have people that we've hired remote across the world, really. And, we have access to better talent and all that. So I think the remote people are, part of the company culture. But yeah, I mean, if I could wave my magic wand and keep the people I have and force them to come to an office, like I would do it in a heartbeat. I believe that we've lost something over the years of like not having the same, company culture of an office.
What piece of advice would you give to a new sales leader starting a new role tomorrow? I
think more than anything, like you really should work for a CEO whose ambition and expectations make you deeply, deeply uncomfortable. Like that is, I think if you think about like, some huge, like, sports nerd, and it's like the best coaches in the world, right? Like they're not your best friend. Like they coach you and they're like, if you look at all the different people, the Nick Sabans, the Bill Belichick's of the world, right? Like you have to want to work for someone that like demands greatness, like every day, often is completely unreasonable, like feels like is unfair and all this stuff. Like you're going to get more out of yourself by working for someone like that than you would ever possibly get like by thinking you can push yourself, that hard. Like, and so for me, it's like, don't work for a company because you think it's chill or it's easy or like the CEO gets it. And like, they're not, a huge like go to market. They're not going to bust your, ass all the time to go to market. It's like, work for someone who you kind of walk out of there and you're like, man, like that guy was intense. Like, I don't know, or woman was intense. Like, I don't know, what I mean? That might be uncomfortable, right? Like you should feel that when you're going to go work for a CEO.
Final one for you, Matt. What company sales strategy have you most been impressed by recently where you've gone, that's good?
I mean, honestly, I think for us, like, like it's more of like a macro strategy of like breaking up our sales org, right? Like at one point we had reps who sold all of the products at Rippling, and when we finally got to a point where we launched our spend management suite, and I had a rep who had like their 12th product that was competing against like a rep at Ramp or Brex, where like all they sold was that very specific thing. And just asking my rep to like be able to compete with that rep when they had 12 other products they needed to sell, it just became clear that like there's the cup is too full here. Like we can't put more knowledge in like the sales rep, cup. And we need to basically carve off this kind of product account executive model and then build this like, culture of like partnership in those deals so that when you're a new logo and you want to buy HCM stuff and spend stuff, like, there's two people working together. And we kind of splintered that off now in a bunch of different places. And had we not done that, we never would have been able to compete in these kind of like hyper competitive, like vertical spaces, like finance and global payroll. And, we've done a really good job in those spaces by being able to do that strategy, which is operationally very complex, but like my RevOps team kind of makes it, takes it on and makes it happen.
Matt, listen, I've so enjoyed this. I so appreciate you being flexible, moving with the schedule, and you've been a fantastic guest, dude.
Awesome, man. I appreciate the time, Harry. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime.